The Douglas Coleman Show is made possible with support from Seth David Radwell, a recent guest on the program and author of American Schism, How the Two Enlightenments Hold the Secret to Healing Our Nation, released this past July. As Publishers Weekly writes in its recent glowing book life review of American Schism, business executive Radwell's epic debut examines the historical influences that have led to what he sees as the collapse of politics in the United States. Seth Radwell makes the case that the current chasm between the American right and left can be traced back to the 18th century's Age of Enlightenment and the basic tenets of liberty, equality, and reason. American Schism provides a historical perspective that can help us fight today's unreason with reason and bridge current-day divides. American Schism by Seth David Radwell is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold. For more information, go to AmericanSchismBook.com.
It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Mark Lefebvre. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hey, Douglas. Great to chat with you again.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show, coming back to the show. You were on, as we were just talking about, you were on the video show in January, and we both agreed that we had no idea what we talked about. So, yeah, as of yesterday, we've done 261 video show productions in 1 year. So yeah, there are
lots of discussions,
yeah.
Lots of things to choose from.
So I can't remember one from the next, but anyways, great to have you back. Thank you for coming. I get a kick out of your name because it's one of those names that has a lot of extra letters.
Oh, yeah. They're just supposed to ignore them, not pronounce them. Yeah, exactly.
Let me count here. Hold on a second. You got L-E, all right. F, right. Okay, so there's an extra E. The B is not even pronounced. And
silent.
Then silent B and a silent R, basically.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Why do you have so many extra letters?
I don't know where it comes from. Apparently, Lefebvre is like the equivalent of Smith. In French, it's a very, very popular name. I also, I tell people to pronounce it as if it were spelled Lefave. That's easy enough. I did a video on YouTube called "You Call Me Fever," and from the old Peggy Lee song "Fever," if you remember that classic.
Yeah.
And it's a joke of how people mispronounce my name all the time, and so it kind of walks through. It's kind of a cheeky. Parody of that song where I get into that and I kind of explain how to pronounce my name, but then talk about how annoyed I am when people call me Fever. But that's been, because you got to have fun with something like that, I suppose.
Well, if you were to pronounce every letter in your last name, it would come out like Lefebvre, and it's just
Lefebvre.
It's just kind of impossible. But, well, what's interesting about French is a lot of the French words, you don't pronounce like the last couple of letters. But it seems to be like the ones in the middle you always pronounce. This is a little more unusual, yeah?
A little strange. So I suppose you probably realize the reason why most of the books I've released were under Mark Leslie, my middle name.
Yeah, that probably made sense. I had this one person on the show, I don't know, a few months ago, and their name was so bad in terms of pronunciation. It was, I think, of some kind of Eastern European origin, where it was basically all consonants. It was all Z's and K's and Y's, and there were no vowels at all to pronounce. and their first name was as long as their last name, about 12 letters. And I thought, do you really want to use that name on your, as your book, as your author name? I really was like trying to be polite and suggest that they change it to something, whimsical, like a good pen name. But they were...
Yeah, I made that decision early on because I knew nobody could spell or pronounce Lefebvre. The only reason I released some of my books using my full mark, Leslie Lefebvre, is because I've worked in the book industry since '92. And people know me as Mark Lefebvre in the book industry, so I had to use that recognition. Again, it was part of the marketing, right, and the branding. But otherwise, I would have avoided it.
Well, that's a good point, and that was sort of my point. It's not any insult to your name or to this other person's name, but just in terms of marketing, to make it easy for people to find you when they go to do a Google search, you got to have some kind of a name that just you can remember easy enough, yeah?
Yeah, exactly, because it's kind of like, if somebody's going to look for Mark Lefebvre, right? Like, whatever. It's like, how do you spell that? I don't know. Yeah. It's like, so you've lost a sale there, right?
Right, because they're going to give up, and then they'll type something in Google, and it won't come up. Your book won't be there. And they'll just say, I'll forget it. I'll go buy another book. I think it could be very frustrating for people. But actually, that's a good segue to talk about publishing a little bit. And you mentioned before we got on that you've got a book called Publishing Pitfalls for Authors. Now, before we start on that, I wanted just to ask you, generally speaking, there's so much stuff out there now because of self-publishing.
Right.
Kindle, basically, you can upload anything. There's no gatekeeper. There's no editor. There's nothing attached to it. You can put up whatever you want. And I've seen some, to be perfectly honest, some real crap that people have put up that just has typos and grammatical errors and absolutely awful. How do the authors that... let me say the good authors, they got to feel a little bit put off by that, wouldn't you think?
Well, it's no different than, the really good authors, the authors who are self-publishing and making 5 and 6 and 7 figures a year from it, are treating it very seriously. They the only self in the self-publishing is self-directed if you do it properly. Right, you hire an editor, you hire a cover designer, you hire the right people, just like a publisher would do. The only difference is you're a lot more adept and dynamic and able to do promotional things a lot more efficiently in the digital environment that the big publishers still haven't figured out. So I tend to operate in a number of circles where it's a given, it's an expectation that if you are self-publishing, that you are editing the book, that you are hiring a professional cover designer and maybe even formatter in some cases, hiring publicists, doing all of that work that a publisher does. Because at the end of the day, the consumer nobody walks into a bookstore and says, I want to get a new book by Random House. Or HarperCollins, I need that new book from HarperCollins. They go, no, I'm going to get this new book from so-and-so because they're an author I love. And they don't know who the publisher is.
They don't care,
and so,
I don't think. Right?
So, that's kind of the reality we live in. And if anything, the authors who don't put the care into their books probably also don't put the care into their covers. And the blurbs, the descriptional blurbs, maybe typos in there too. That's kind of a sign. Could be an indication like, maybe I'm not going to get a quality product here. And the thing is on Kindle and Kobo and Apple and Nook and all of those places where you can get ebooks, you can preview the book, right? Customers can kind of crack it open and look at the first 5-10%. And that's usually, you can tell right away if you're dealing with a quality product or not.
Well, you brought up a good point that people do not go shopping for a book based on the publisher. And similarly with music, I don't think I've known anybody that says, I'm going to go out and buy or download some music as long as it's from Universal Music or Sony.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love this artist. I love this band.
I love this artist. I love this band. And even with movies, it's always about, who stars in it? That's usually the first question. Or what is it about? But typically it's the star.
Maybe Pixar has developed a name, like as a film production company because of the style that they use.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. But it's true. But the market has become so saturated. So let's go to your title, Pitfalls. When you're talking about publishing, are you talking about the big five, or are you talking about authors that want to self-publish and the pitfalls
I am
that they
actually
run into?
addressing authors regardless of how they publish. And I've taken that approach with most of my books on the business of writing and publishing. So several years ago, I put out a much smaller book. It's only about 16,000 words, so relatively small, called The 7 Ps of Publishing Success. And having worked in the book industry since 1992, and being traditionally published and self-published, and having worked throughout the industry since 92, I outlined the 7 common things that the most successful authors, whether they were traditionally published or self-published, what they had in common. So, patience, practice, persistence are 3 of the main Ps, right? And professionalism is one of them. And so that was the approach. I want an author, no matter what they've chosen to do or how they decide to do it, I want them to understand what it means to be successful. And so that's what that book was. And then as I was putting it together, because, it was alliteration, I wanted to have the 7 Ps. And then I started, my whiteboard had all these other Ps that I hadn't addressed, but they were negatives, not positives. So I started writing them down, and then I realized I had 30 of them. And I'm like, well, I can't call it the 30 Ps of, publishing pitfalls. So I just decided to call it Publishing Pitfalls for Authors. And I went with alliteration. I went with the Ps. And I outlined, so and again, some of them more specifically. So pricing, for example, is an area that can be a pitfall for writers. And if you're traditionally published, you usually have no control over pricing. That's in your publisher's hands. So that one would be more geared for self-publishing. But then I actually have, so publishers and predators are 2 of the Ps that you need to be conscious of. And with publishers, it's not that publishers are bad, it's that there's a lot of predators pretending to be publishers, and that they cater to self-publishing and they pretend to be a publisher. But even when you're looking to sign a contract with a publisher, there are things to look out for. There's clauses to look out for. There's certain realms that you need to be leery of, and I want authors to be able to, if they are going to work with a publisher, understand what is the publisher going to do and what are they not going to do. So, for example, one of the biggest misconceptions authors have is, well, if I have a publisher, then they're going to do all the marketing for me and I don't have to do any. Well, no. The sad thing is, the reality is that you will have to do your own marketing, regardless of how you're published. If I've been traditionally published and self-published, and for example, they assign a publicist to me from my publisher, but that poor publicist has, a dozen other authors who have book releases that month that they're working with. And if I'm not the big name author working for that publisher, and most authors are not, they're mid-list or beginning writers, they're going to get very little of the publicist's time and attention. So those are some of the things that I kind of try to outline in the book.
The one thing that somebody told me, and we had a similar conversation, was, and I don't know if I agree with it or not, but I want to throw it at you and see what you think. They said that they would always prefer to be traditionally published because of the validation. Because if somebody takes your book, they're saying, we feel your book is good enough for our company, and it gives you immediate validation, and that they might even give you a check as an advance.
Right.
Where when you do it yourself, you don't get that same validation. You put it out there and, you hope you get a review or something, but it's not quite the same thing. Now, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that there is something to be said in that I know self-published authors who bring in 6 figures a year, because when you self-publish, you keep 70% of it, right? When with my traditionally published books, I make 8% off those sales, and I get them a year later with 30% withholding against returns. Okay, so a $25 book sells, and I get $2 a year later.
That's what I was going to ask you, what the cut was, because...
Yeah, whereas I keep 70%, so I can sell an ebook for $5 and make $3.50. And so there are authors who are self-published making really good money who, even though they have validation through thousands of readers, they put out a new book and they immediately hit the bestseller list because they sell 1,000 copies on day one, and they have people reading their book around the world and raving, and dozens of reviews and stuff like that. That's validation. But then they have never had the validation of having their manuscript selected from a slush pile. So there is validation there. The other thing that I often say, because again, I embrace both sides. I know there are pros and cons to both traditional publishing and self-publishing, and I tend to take a very balanced approach and recognize that there are benefits. So, for example, my one of the publishers I work with, which is Canada's largest independent publisher, Dundurn, they've got my books into Walmart, Costco, chain stores, indie bookstores. I walked into a Barnes & Noble in Vegas and saw one of my books on the shelf there. Same thing in Florida. I've walked into an independent bookstore and saw one of my other books on the shelf there, because that's what this publisher can do. They can get the book into bookstores. And so I've often say that a lot of people say, self-publishing is vanity publishing, but I was like, in some cases, the vanity is the vanity of walking into a bookstore and seeing your book on the shelf. It doesn't mean I'm going to make more money. It just means that there's that intrinsic pleasure of that. It's a wonderful experience to walk into a library or bookstore and find your book on the shelf. Oh, yeah. And as much money as indie authors make, they rarely get that experience, because the self-published books tend to be print on demand, non-returnable, and so they don't have access to that same sort of old boys school of distribution that the publishers really know intricately.
Right. And that's the same with music too. Most of the indie music that's out there right now, personally for me, is the better music. However, as good as you can get and as popular as you can get as an indie, you still don't have the distribution power that the major labels have.
Yeah, that Sony, Universal, or any of those labels have. Yeah, right. and that's the big challenge. Now, the great thing is that I think the internet and online bookselling and ebooks in particular have helped democratize the online catalogs, so that it's not just the publishers that can afford to pay Barnes & Noble a lot of money to get these books put on the front placement on a shelf or in the main aisle when they walk in. It's somebody who's published a really, really good book, and word of mouth, and all of those same things, right? A great cover, a great description,
sure,
and a great launch team. Like even like indie musicians, the idea of the street team, that as you're traveling through town and somebody's plastering posters all over town to say that you're going to be playing at this one club or whatever, authors, really successful authors, both indie authors and trad pub authors, usually have some sort of street team where they get advanced readers of the copies of the book, and they're out there pushing and leaving reviews and sharing with their friends and stuff like that. So that's why I want to help authors understand the business, so that if they decide, for myself, when I decide whether I'm going to self-publish something or traditionally publish, one of the questions is where and how do I want to sell it? If I want it to be sold in print and I want it to be sold through bookstores, traditional publishing is the way to go. And so many of my books, which are souvenirs, true ghost story books, for example, of different cities and locations, those tend to be souvenirs. People don't want to read them in ebook. They want to read them in print. Those are best to go through a traditional publisher. But some of the novels that I write, like the Canadian Werewolf series, which is more urban fantasy, there are people who definitely want the hardcover and paperback, and I have those available. But I tend to sell a lot more ebooks and make a lot more off those, because, again, it's 70% and I get paid every month, as opposed to once a year. I get this, check, and I have no idea how the only time with one of my traditionally published books is when I actually had a book launch at a Costco where there was a skid of my book sitting there, and I spent the whole day signing books until like 3/4 of the skid was gone. The only time I recognized that or knew what my sales were is I was nominated for a literary award, and I was having dinner with one of the VPs and the president of the publishing company. And we were at this ceremony. He says, "Wow, you went into a second print run in the first 3 weeks. That means, you've sold X thousand copies already." And that's the only time you ever find out, because when you're traditionally published, you get a statement mailed to you maybe twice a year, if you're lucky. You have no idea how it's selling. Whereas with my indie published stuff or self-published stuff, I can log onto a dashboard and go, "Oh, this is how many I sold today on Amazon." So there's that. It's really interesting though. But I want authors to be able to make informed decisions so that they're making really solid business decisions rather than going into this blind.
How do you get 70% though? Because I just put out a little book on Kindle. It's ebook only. You said your book was short or something. Maybe not this one. You were referring to a different book.
What was your price?
99 cents.
So if you price lower than $2.99, you make 35%.
Oh, okay.
And on Kindle, if you price between $2.99 and $9.99, you make 35%. Or 70%. If you go below $2.99 or above $9.99, you make 35%, and that's Kindle.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, I couldn't justify selling it for more than that because you mentioned something about a short book having 16,000 words. Mine is half that. It's only 8, and I don't even call it a book. I call it a pamphlet because it's just it's a thing about podcasting and just some sort of fun, sort of sarcastic jabs at way too many people doing podcasts that don't belong doing podcasts. And, I thought, well, for that small of a book, I really can't be charging $3 or $4 for it. So
right. Yeah. And that's the decision that you have to kind of make, right? Is look at what will the market tolerate? What will the market bear? I did. So for example, that book, I think that book I have sells for $2.99. Or $3.99. I'm trying to remember somewhere. It's in the lower price realm. But when I did the audiobook and the one that I recorded, because it's only about a 2-hour read, but it took me a full week of production to do it properly and all the editing and mastering and all the stuff to do it well. I think the audiobook sells for $6.99. But I also used an AI voice technology to have it read by British male Brian, and it was a computerized voice, so it can slightly tell that it's computerized, but it sounds pretty natural. And that one I sell for 99 cents because there are the people who want to hear the author himself read it. That's going to cost money because it took time. But this Brian fellow with the wonderful British accent, if you just want the content and you don't care about the nuances of my voice and the inflection that you get when it's a real human narrator. So again, I think there's possibilities with technology that writers can leverage because, if you just want the content, you get it for that. And so let's say that book you put out for podcasting, if there's a paperback version of it, it's obviously going to have to cost more because there's the paper and there's the actual dead trees involved, right? That someone's got to pay for. So
I didn't put it out as a paperback. I mean, not yet. I guess I could anytime, right? I can just go back in there and log into Kindle and do it, right?
Yeah, it's easy enough to create a paperback version. With Draft to Digital, for example, they have they're a distributor that will distribute, and they have the print beta right now, where you only need the front cover, and they'll make the full cover wrap for you to save you the time and hassle of having to go and hire a designer to do the full cover flat that you would have to do for a paperback book.
Oh, okay. Because that was one of the reasons I looked at it, and I thought, and then it said, "Oh, you need to do the binding," and I was like, "Well, this thing is so small, it wouldn't even have a binding." Yeah.
I think the minimum there's a minimum page count. It has to be like 60 pages or something like that to bind it properly.
I want it to look like, you remember those Cliff Notes, the yellow with the black stripes that they used to sell? Yeah. Okay, it's about that big. That's
almost. I call them. So I've done a lot of short fiction. I started off selling short stories to magazines and anthologies, and then you get the rights back. And then what I did is I've re-released them, and I call these. They were initially digital chapbooks, so maybe 3 or 4 stories on a theme. So, for example, I have Bumps in the Night, which is stories to be read around a campfire. So they're all like campfire type stories. And then another one is Halloween Tales, and another one, like different themes. And those tend to be 12 to 15,000 words, and they're small. So I consider them chapbooks. And again, the paperbacks are 80 pages, 60 pages. And those sell usually for 99 cents in ebook form. But obviously the paperback's going to be $5 because, again, for people who really want them, you got to pay for the paper,
right?
And stuff like that.
Exactly. I wanted to hit on one thing on your bio says 5 fun facts about Mark, and then we got to wrap it up. It says,
Sure.
Mark grew up as an only child, but he had 7 siblings. Were you one of those that just hid in the basement all the time? Were you one of those kids?
I was one of those. Yeah, no, I was. I was vitamin D deficient, writing in the basement when I was a kid instead of being out in the sun. No, I was adopted, and then later in life, when I was in my late 20s, when I was looking at having kids, I wanted to find my birth family to see if there were anything that I needed to be aware of, like biological things. And I learned that I had a full sister and 6 other half siblings, because my mom and dad had gotten together. My birth parents had gotten together, and so that was an interesting thing where I grew up an only child, but I had 7 siblings. So, yeah, interesting one.
Oh, I see. So wait a minute. Now I'm confused. Okay, so your adopted parents only had you.
Yeah, that was it. I was the only one.
Oh, okay. But your biological parents had 7 others.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I didn't meet these siblings until I was in my mid 20s, late 20s, I should say. Because, so that was kind of an interesting thing. It's like I grew up an only child, but I have all these siblings.
Right. Okay. No, originally when you said that, I thought that your adopted parents had 7 kids and they adopted you, and I thought, what in the world would they want with another kid after 7? You know. I was a little confused on the premise. Okay. Oh, well, that's cool. Yeah. So did you find anything strange? I mean, like one of your siblings had 3 eyes or anything like that?
No. I mean, high blood pressure runs in the family, which I have, and epilepsy as well, which I had growing up, but I outgrew once I passed puberty. So I was very lucky in that regard.
You mean full-on epilepsy with seizures and?
Yeah, seizures and everything. I was on medication until I was in my mid-20s, and then they stopped. So I was very fortunate. One of my half sisters, unfortunately, was not as lucky because even with medication, she would still have seizures. Like I was able to get a full driver's license and everything because my last seizure was 2 years prior to turning 16, because I was on medication and it was completely controlled. So again, I was very, very lucky, very fortunate.
Oh, that's great. Well, we do have to wrap it up, Mark. Do you have a website you want to give out?
Yeah, people can find out all about me on at markleslie.ca. See, nobody has to spell Lefebvre.
You're doing our listeners a great favor by not making them spell it. Thanks so much for coming on, Mark. This was fun. A lot of fun.
Chatting with you again, Douglas.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Douglas Coleman's Don't Do a Podcast is a dryly humorous rant about Douglas's pet peeve, the unrelenting torrent of podcasts hitting the web on a constant basis. As technology has put podcasting within the reach of anyone, many wholly unqualified people have taken the plunge. This witty polemic tries to persuade them from broadcasting their drivel using Douglas's brand of sarcastic humor. Now on Amazon, only 99 cents.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com. Radio promotion for indie musicians.
Hey, this is Ray Powers. Don't touch anything. You've got it right where you need it. Tuned in to the Douglas Coleman Show. You heard me.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Nguyen Mai. Hello, Nguyen Mai. How are you?
Thank you so much, Douglas, for having me. I'm feeling great and excited to talk with you about my novel, The Mountains Sing.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. It's nice to have you here. So, before we talk about your book, can you give us a little bit of your backstory? Tell us just a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing, and then we'll get to your book.
Yes, so I'm a Vietnamese writer. So I was born and grew up in Vietnam. I published 8 books of poetry, fiction, and non-fiction in Vietnamese. And The Mountain Sing is the first novel and first book in English that I have written. Okay.
Where do you live now?
So at the moment, I just moved away. I just moved away from Indonesia, and I'm about to go to Kyrgyzstan to live and work. So my husband is a diplomat, so that's why I've been dividing my time between Vietnam and another country.
Oh, all right. Oh, well, where are you calling in from right now?
So I'm in Austria right now.
Austria?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, you do get around. Okay. When did you start writing poetry?
So I always loved to read as a child. So when I was small, growing up in the countryside of Vietnam, our most valuable possession were books. So books enabled me to travel, and I dreamed of being a writer. So I used to keep a diary. So I used to write the poetry, in my diary. And I because my family was really poor, so I didn't have a chance to become a writer until I was 33. So I came back to poetry when I was 33 and living in Hanoi. So I wrote a lot about the ordinary people of Vietnam, and then I wanted to because the international audience is normally know about Vietnam as a war rather than as a country rich in cultural traditions and history. So I started to translate Vietnamese poetry, and because not many people read poetry, so I had the idea of translating a Vietnamese novel. So I was looking for a novel for a while to translate, and then one day I told myself, why don't I write one?
You brought up an interesting point, and I just wanted to touch on it briefly for a second. When you mentioned Vietnam, and particularly I think Americans only associate Vietnam with the war. Is there any remnants of the war? Because I know it's been, 40 years since the war ended. Is there any remnants of the American war there, or is it pretty much gone in terms of any historical impact at this point?
Oh, of course, we still live with the trauma of the war. I just wrote an essay on the New York Times about the Agent Orange victims. In Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, millions of people are still living with the consequences of Agent Orange. Babies are still born being deformed. People are still having cancer because of Agent Orange, and there are American military bases. The former bases are still full of dioxin in the ground. So so there's a large military base in Bien Hoa province, and tens of thousands of people have been living around it, and being directly impacted by it. And the dioxin from Agent Orange, it doesn't go away with time. It seeps into the ground. It stays in the bottom of rivers, of lake. And then it's passed on to people by fish and the food chain. So the poison is being, consumed by Vietnamese people every day now still, and this horror has not been dealt with, and we're still living with the consequences of unexploded ordinances. There are still people dying every year because they encounter bombs or unexploded ordinances left on the ground when people build a new home, or they dig up a new something, or people do farming. So there are a lot of people still traumatized in Vietnam, people who have lost family members, who haven't found them. So there are tens of thousands of missing people from the war, and many families haven't been able to find their members. And I wrote this book and I put Vietnamese people in the center stage. I present all of these issues in my book because these are the issues we are still living with, and in my book is set against backdrop of the Vietnam War, but I don't feature Americans in it. I feature Vietnamese only, Northern Vietnamese and Southern Vietnamese, who fought against each other, and that's the reality of our war. One long-lasting impact of the war is that many family members fought against each other in this war, and reconciliation and forgiveness is really difficult. And this is one consequence of the war that we have to live with until today. People still don't talk to each other, or they have resentment against each other because of different sides that we had to take.
So when you were growing, you weren't old enough to be involved in the war. Were you a child when it was going?
So I was born in 1973, 2 years before the war ended.
Okay.
So I don't remember anything about the war that when it was happening, because I was too small. But I remember growing up, in a village empty of men and full of women waiting for the return of those men, and I remember the few men who came back, how haunted they were, and if they didn't lose their body parts, they lost a part of their soul. And when I was 6 years old, my family moved to the south of Vietnam, and the south of Vietnam and north of Vietnam were divided because of the war. And because we came from the north, so we were like refugees, and we were hated in the south because the Southerners considered us as invaders, even though the country was united. I remember, people in the South, people being put into re-education camps if they had fought alongside with Americans. And I remember people fleeing by boats, so there were a lot of turmoil during my childhood growing up directly because of the war, in my home in north of Vietnam, we had a bunker, under the roots of the bamboo range, where I played hide and seek, but it was the shelter that kept my family alive during the American bombings.
Wow. What about your parents? Are they still alive?
So my parents are in Ho Chi Minh City right now. Yes, so they are in their 80s now. So they escaped death many times during the war. My parents were both teachers and farmers. So luckily they didn't have to participate in the war, but we have family members, fighting in the war against each other. And and some of them died, and I have an uncle who fought for the Northern Vietnamese army, and I really I remember him coming back. I remember meeting him many times, and he wouldn't tell me anything, and he was very traumatized. And he died before I became a writer. So I really wanted to understand what he went through, because he walked, so the battlefields during the Vietnam War took place mainly in South and Middle Vietnam. So the Northern Vietnamese soldier had to get to the south of Vietnam, and Vietnam is a long country. So my uncle, along with many other soldiers, walked for hundreds of kilometers, months during the war to the south. So he went through a lot of things, and he saw a lot of things. And he died before I became a writer. So I wanted to find out what he went through. So I interviewed a lot of veterans. So in my novel, one of the characters went to the south by walking through the jungles together with his comrades. So there's one entire chapter in the book about that walk, So my book is not just about the Vietnam War. So it's about Vietnam's 20th century history via the life of 4 generations of a Vietnamese family. So, by reading the book, you will get to experience all the different events that Vietnam went through: the French colonization of Vietnam, the Japanese invasion, the American War, the war's aftermath, and the time when we had to live under the American embargo.
Well, it sounds very interesting. And it's also won several international book awards, yeah?
Yes, so I'm really honored. I wrote this book as an act to honor the memories of those people whom I talked to, I wrote this book to understand, the history of my family, because some of the experiences of the characters in the novel are inspired by the experiences of my own family. And so I wrote this book to understand, my ancestors, what they went through, and understand the history of our Vietnamese community. So I wrote this book, first and foremost for myself, and then, for Vietnamese people. So I'm just thrilled that the book is being read in many different countries. So it's being translated into 10 different languages after 1.5 years, and it has won many awards. And so I'm just very grateful and honored.
Well, that's fantastic. I think that's super. And on your bio, it says your second novel in English, Dust Child, is set in Vietnam and forthcoming. Is that out yet, or when do we expect that one?
So I'm finalizing the edits at the moment. So I did my PhD research for this novel. So this novel is set in Vietnam during the current day and also during the Vietnam War. So one of the main characters of this book is a Black Amerasian who was born into a relationship between a Black man and a Vietnamese woman, a Black American soldier and a Vietnamese prostitute, and abandoned during the Vietnam War. So during the Vietnam War, because millions of American men were in Vietnam, and many of them had relationship with Vietnamese women. So,
right.
A tenth of thousands of those mixed children were born, and most of them were abandoned, and they were discriminated against after the war. And they went through terrible things, and I feel like they are the forgotten victims of the war. So this book is about the experiences of Amerasians and their family members, and I want to look into the circumstances why these American soldiers walked away from their pregnant girlfriends, and why these Vietnamese women had to work in bars and become prostitutes. So this book is very much about the humanity of all different sides, and the trauma of war until today, experienced by Americans, by Vietnamese, by Amerasians. With all of my work, I write about wars to call for peace. I really feel like, as a human race, we have to work with each other to promote peace and to heal and reconcile, because we have done so much damage to not only to each other, but to nature, to society, to culture, because of aggression, because of imperialism, because of colonization.
Yeah, we haven't been very nice over the last 5,000 years. And I don't know, I would hope that we are making progress, but it seems like every time technology makes a leap, things don't get better. They just change. There's always conflict. There's always war somewhere. There's always trauma. There's always pain. And that hasn't changed. It's just the sort of the way in which it's afflicted on people has changed with technology. It's very strange to me.
And even how we deal with the pandemic at the moment, there's an inequity of vaccine distribution.
Yes.
So all wealthy nations have monopolized the supply of vaccines, and rich countries have been wasting millions of doses, whereas in Southeast Asia, for example, people are dying and desperate for vaccines. So, and I just read a report that we have the rate of global poverty has gone back, by 30 years. So all of the efforts we have made in poverty alleviation, inequality have been erased for so many years because of this pandemic. And I'm really disappointed that we don't work together better as a human race. And we've been talking about a pandemic for so many years. So I thought we were prepared. But I think, this pandemic really reveals a lot of greed and power, which are the two factors that cause wars.
Absolutely agree with you. And I think you're right that the pandemic has sort of pulled back the curtain and really exposed a lot of the underbelly of the corruption in this world.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We do have to wind this down. Do you have a website that you want to give out, personal one or one for your book?
Yes. So my website is under my name, nguyenphanquemai.com.
All right. And are you on social media as well? Are there links to social media there?
Yes, so I'm all on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
Okay. Can we spell out your name so that people know? Because they might not be able to find it.
Nguyen, Nguyen.
Okay.
Phan, Phan, Que Mai, Que. Mai is Mai.
Okay. .com.
Yes.
Okay.
NguyenPhanQueMai.com. So if you search The Mountains Sing, you will find my name because spelling is difficult.
Okay. The Mountains Sing. And the other book we were just talking about, Dust Child, do you have a expected date when that's going to be out or not yet?
So my publisher has acquired world rights for the novel. So I don't know. I'm just taking my time with the edits. I mean, my publisher told me I don't need to edit a lot, but at the moment I'm just revising my research notes. I'm going through my research notes and doing some more research. I just want to have a strong foundation for the book. So I hope next year or latest by spring 2023.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your stories. Very interesting. And best of luck with everything you're doing.
Thank you so much, Douglas, for having me. And thank you for the great work you have been doing to promote literature. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.